Imagine being able to fly faster than the Earth's rotation, or fly so high you can see its curvature. A feat once delegated to the likes of highly trained pilots and astronauts was once a reality for those aboard the Concorde. Jointly built by manufacturers in Great Britain and France, the aircraft had a flight time from New York to London at 3.5 hours. Each flight ushered around 92 to 128 passengers and did so in style for 3 decades. It was the pinnacle of air travel luxury. However, after a tragic accident taking the lives of 109 people and a multitude of contributing factors, Concorde's eventual retirement came in 2003. And so did supersonic travel, as it is yet to make a comeback. In today's video, we'll take a look at what happened to supersonic jets. It's the mid-20th century, and jets are the new frontier of aviation technology. They can fly faster and higher than traditional planes. But that's not enough for some people. Thus, the supersonic airliner was born. After American Air Force pilot Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier in 1947, SSTs, or supersonic transport, has become a booming industry. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, the Cold War technological race encouraged governments across the globe to pour millions of dollars into supersonic R&D, all in hopes of becoming not only the first nation to produce a commercially viable SST, but also to set a precedent for the rest of the world. The top 3 positions in the race to become supersonic are filled by none other than the Americans with the Boeing 2707, the joint British and French with the Concorde, and the Soviets with the Tu-144. Due to design issues leaving the Boeing 2707 severely overweight and unable to fly, combined with the concerns of the impact supersonic travel had on factors below the plane, the project slowly faded into obscurity as the Concorde dominated the market. But wait, what happened to the Soviets? With much more primitive technology, they relied heavily on their ability to produce quality products due to their highly skilled engineers. Who am I kidding? They stole 90,000 technological documents pertaining to the Concorde and other aircraft, swiftly closing the gap. But even after cheating on their homework, the Tu-144 stood no chance against the Concorde, as the superiorly built British and French aircraft was designed with the goal of providing a luxury experience for passengers, whereas the Soviets, they tried. As champagne and caviar made its way down the aisle of the Concorde, passengers relished in a smooth, quiet ride and having the ability to speak to their fellow passengers. Aboard the Tu-144, champagne and caviar was still served, but passengers often complained about the cramped seating and obnoxiously loud engine humming that led passengers to write handwritten notes to communicate. Superficial stuff aside, it wasn't only the comfortability factor that doomed the Tu-144. Its much more primitive engine design prevented it from flying over a distance of 25,000 miles. Compared to the Concorde, that seemed rather disappointing. Not to mention, out of the total 102 scheduled flights, 226 mechanical failures were recorded. Its airworthiness was in question since its conception, but after an abundance of televised accidents throughout the 70s and 80s, it seemed the Soviets rushing their design in order to get it done first, rather than give it the necessary time and attention, would ultimately lead to its downfall while paving the way for its more successful younger competitor, the Concorde. If you guys are enjoying the video, remember to hit that like button, consider subscribing, and leave a comment. But let's get back to it. With a cruising altitude of 60,000 feet and an absolute bonkers top speed of Mach 2, it's safe to say the Concorde was nothing less than a marvel in aviation design. Coming equipped with Rolls-Royce Olympus engines producing 52,000 pounds of thrust, a circulating fuel system to better aid in takeoff and landing stability, and perhaps the most memorable aspect of them all, the droop snoot, the ability to drop the nose of the aircraft to maintain visibility while landing. This is due to the extremely high angle of attack the Concorde possesses when approaching the tarmac. Throughout its development in the early 60s, anticipation was high, as the initial projection for interest within the market was estimated to be around 350 jets by 1980. Explaining the influx of orders received from several major airlines such as Pan Am, TWA, American, United, the list goes on. Through genius-level innovation and rigorous trial and error, comfortable supersonic flight was a possibility, and it seemed like everybody wanted a piece of it. After 13 years of development and 6 years after its first flight, the Concorde was finally ready for commercial use. Except when the money men put their wallets away and investors began asking valid questions like, where would this thing even be able to fly? It all began to slip. Years prior, a ban was put into place restricting SSTs from flying over the United States, a direct result of a study done by the FFA where they found the concussive shock waves produced by the aircraft going supersonic could cause irreparable damage to those beneath the plane's path. That meant Concorde was only allowed to fly over oceans, severely limiting its possible flight paths. Couple this with the crippling 1973 oil crisis, and big-name airliners, once thought to slap their logo on the side of a Concorde, began canceling their orders. That is everyone but British Airways and Air France, leaving them the sole operators of the aircraft. However, despite all the factors contributing to the Concorde being painted in a bad light, the aircraft maintained its iconic status. A crown jewel in aviation technology, shared between France and Britain, the aircraft left an impact like no other, which seems fitting, as its intention was like no other. You see, most aircraft at the time, such as the Boeing 747, had one goal in mind: fitting as many butts and seats as possible to maximize ticket sales. But in the case of the Concorde, it put an emphasis on speed and luxury, securing high status recognition from those willing to pay the price. With round trips easily surpassing $13,000, not many people could afford to fly Concorde often, putting it leagues ahead of the budget of an average business and first-class passenger. This alienated a lot of the market, as most started to see Concorde as the elite tier flying experience. Makes sense when considering most of the clientele was composed of business travelers and celebrities that have flocked from around the world, keen on experiencing the unique atmospheric cocktail party Concorde Airlines provided. From the 1980s to the 1990s, Concorde was in its heyday, flying the likes of Sting, Jeremy Clarkson, and other celebrities across the Atlantic in record time, actually making the two airlines money. The aircraft seemed to have everything going for it, but this relatively smooth sailing actually turned out to be the calm before the storm. On July 25, 2000, Air France Flight 4590 taxied onto the runway at Charles de Gaulle Airport, ready for its international charter flight from Paris to New York. With 109 people aboard, the captains initiated takeoff, and upon acceleration, a small piece of metal debris left on the runway punctured one of the Concorde's tires, resulting in massive chunks of rubber flying up and colliding with the fuselage, rupturing the gas tank just behind the left engine. Flames ignited from the rear of the aircraft, and due to its speed, it was unable to abort takeoff. Pilots and flight crew aboard did everything they could to salvage the situation, but unable to gain altitude due to catastrophic system failure, Flight 4590 entered a stall and began to plummet towards the ground, colliding with a hotel and instantly erupting into a ball of fire and smoke, killing all passengers aboard and 4 on the ground. After an investigation was opened into the cause of the accident, public sentiment began to sour around the Concorde, as reports surfaced shifting blame on specific errors made by Concorde maintenance teams and flight crew prior to takeoff. Both British Airways and Air France resumed operation in November 2001, shortly after the 9/11 terror attacks. The two airways began bleeding funds, as almost all interest around the Concorde was lost, due in part by increasingly rising maintenance and fuel costs, making the 32-year-old plane's age very apparent. Not to mention, other business class flights began to rival its luxuriousness. It became hard for individuals to justify paying ludicrous amounts of money to fly Concorde just to save a few hours of flight time. After the investigation concluded, it pointed out many flaws in the aircraft's assembly, and the cost to replace the faulty parts among the fleet was too great, forcing British Airways and Air France to retire the aircraft altogether by the end of April 2003. And with elegance, the fleet of Concordes began making their final descents around the world. While supersonic flight was impressive, it was fast becoming clear that its time had come and gone. On October 24, 2003, the last Concorde touched down in London's Heathrow Airport, marking the end of an era. While its speed was awe-inspiring, the operating cost, environmental impact, and passenger capacity reflected its limited 30 years of operation. In the coming years, the climate and aviation technologies shifted as the world turned towards more economically and environmentally friendly means of air transportation. Although the Concorde is now an attraction in museums around the world, it doesn't mean its influence is a novelty. A few companies are exploring new technologies to usher in the next chapter of supersonic civil aviation. While big-name conglomerates like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Airbus state they're in various stages of development of their supersonic aircrafts, it's smaller startups like Boom Technology and Spike Aerospace that seem to be pioneering the industry as of late. Instead of massive commercial supersonic jetliners, these smaller startups are focusing on the much more achievable supersonic private plane. The advancements these companies are making are allowing us to get one step closer to perfecting the tantalizing technology we once possessed. Who knows, we might even see a revival of the supersonic travel industry in the near future. Appreciate you guys sticking around to the end. If you're interested in the topic I discussed today, I'll leave links in the description to videos that helped me better create this one. But with that, hope you guys enjoyed. Have a good one.